Coming up, the right-wing British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, was a massive supporter of Brexit back in 2016. But nowadays, not so much. To be fair, their assistant editor, Jeremy Warner, wrote 2 years ago that Downbeat predictions on the economic consequences of leaving the EU have turned out to be overwhelmingly correct. But even so, his Telegraph article this week shocked me in its ferocious put-down of the Brexit this very same organ once championed. How times have changed now that reality has bitten. The Telegraph article this week was entitled "Geo-political forces are remorselessly pushing Britain and Europe back together. Westminster is lurching from one shock to the next and now has precious few options left," he says, adding that it's inevitable that the UK must gravitate back towards the European Union. Stay tuned. The dream of the Brexitists was what they inaccurately dubbed Singapore-on-Thames, by which they meant a low-tax, small government, lightly regulated economy that would make Britain great again, once freed from the shackles of the European Union. The reality, reports Jeremy Warner, is of a still deeply divided nation heading towards the highest tax burden since the Second World War. And it's true. Yet despite that, the national debt remains stubbornly high, leading the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies to say that as a result, there's no room for Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to make significant tax cuts. This is where the country is after 14 years of Tory rule and their dogmatic obsession of shrinking the state through austerity, underinvestment in public services, and redistributing wealth from the poorest to the very richest in society through relatively lower taxes on unearned income and other tax loopholes for the wealthy classes. But back to Warner's article. Wherever you look, he says, there is a deep sense of malaise. It is indeed hard to recall a time when people were more pessimistic about the future than they are now. I'm in my 60s now, and I agree. I can't recall a time when the country felt so broken, so polarised, so completely fed up. Warner says that this might not be entirely connected to Brexit, but he does say that being out on our own has failed to improve the mood in post-Brexit Britain. In what sounds more like a truth-to-power diatribe, the assistant editor of our foremost conservative broadsheet goes on to say, "Nothing seems to work. There are long waiting lists for almost every public service. There's not enough housing to go around, and at a loss for solutions, our public discourse has degenerated into the demeaning bile of culture wars irrelevance." Wow, if Jeremy Warner ever loses his job at the Tory graph, he's welcome to join the writing team right here at Truth to Power. And talking of Truth to Power, if you enjoy these videos, please give this a like, subscribe to the channel and share a link on your social media. But back to Warner's article. What on earth happened, he demands. Why has the spirit of national renewal that Brexit was meant to give rise to fallen so woefully short? Warner goes on to reference Liz Truss, the last Prime Minister, as saying that Brexit has failed because of various saboteurs or the imaginary deep state that Truss and her new friends in Trump's Christian Nationalist Republican Party like to blame for all our woes. Warner dismisses Truss's conspiracy theories in this article as just a lot of paranoid nonsense straight out of the populist playbook, where an imaginary enemy within is created as a way to channel frustrations towards a fictitious hate figure. I don't want to descend into cliché at this point, but I want to pick up on Warner's theme here and just reference the concept of the 2-minute hate, which was from Orwell's novel 1984. Starting on page 13, Orwell wrote about the ritual where workers had to gather in front of a screen at 11 AM each day. It was the face of Emmanuel Goldstein, the villain against whom the party is fighting, and the man who, Big Brother tells them, is out to destroy their way of life. It was towards Goldstein, not each other or the party, that the citizens of Oceania were trained to aim their hate. And it was towards the European Union that the citizens of the UK were trained to aim their hate. And now that we have Brexited, the government attempts to channel that hate towards immigrants, lefty lawyers, judges, peaceful protesters, rejoiners, Guardian-reading, tofu-eating wokerati, so-called benefit scroungers, young people using poor mental health as an excuse not to work or study, and now, this week, a secret group of all-powerful Islamists who apparently control Sadiq Khan and London. But all this follows the natural pattern of imagined enemies established by UKIP and the right of the Tory party in order to win their Brexit. But now they have won it, they've unleashed the demon while failing spectacularly to demonstrate any meaningful benefit to Brexit. They promised no downside, just a considerable upside. They promised massive cuts in immigration. They promised lower prices and a better standard of living. They promised a UK with a better standing on the global stage. They promised a properly funded NHS with lower waiting lists. They might as well have promised unicorns crapping out rainbows in the sunlit uplands of Brexit land, because none of it was ever going to happen. And predictably, none of it actually came to pass. Why not? Was it because of the pandemic? Was it the war in Ukraine? Was it because the Remainer establishment sabotaged a hypothetical Brexit that would have been successful? Well, what does the assistant editor of the Brexit championing Telegraph now think? Why did Brexit fail to deliver its promises? It was because the vision of Singapore-on-Thames was always a fantasy that would never be capable of uniting the nation behind it. Why not, Jeremy? Because everyone wants low taxes, but on the whole, they also want top-drawer public services, a credible military, a free-at-the-point-of-use national health service, and triple-locked state pensions. Flippin' it, Jeremy, had you forgotten you're writing in the Telegraph? An excellent observation, and one that could be a neat synopsis for Labour's next election manifesto. And talking of Labour, Keir Starmer has ruled out taking Britain back into the single market and the EU customs union, something which did annoy me hugely at the time. But seeing as the EU are hardly likely to welcome the UK back into either the customs union or the single market for at least a generation, it's not the greatest of Starmer's sins. And he has made it clear that he wants the UK under Labour to move back to a far closer relationship with the Europeans, and talks about close regulatory alignment, which is an obvious stepping stone back towards a membership application in the future. It's the only sensible course really, and will probably be just as effective at eventually reversing Brexit as any unilateral declaration right now of wanting to rejoin. And Jonathan Warner appears to agree with me, saying, this is partly because geopolitical forces are remorselessly pushing the UK and the EU back together again. As trade with other blocs becomes more difficult, the UK will naturally gravitate towards its closest neighbours. It already is over Ukraine. In other words, what the assistant editor of the Daily Telegraph seems to be saying is that the only way out of the post-Tory UK's predicament of a high-tax, low-growth economy with an impoverishment of all but the wealthier classes is to reverse Brexit as far as is realistically possible. Because without that, according to the Office of National Statistics and the Office for Budgetary Responsibility, there are no options to reduce public debt or increase public spending without sending the already record-equalling post-war taxation burden beyond levels seen in living memory. And look, there are many reasons for why the UK is in the mess it is economically. The global financial crisis of 2008, the pandemic lockdowns of 2020, and the energy price shock after the invasion of Ukraine. They're all factors, of course. And on top of that, there is an ageing demographic and 14 years of Tory economic vandalism by way of austerity, lack of investment, privatisation, and the Truss-Kwarteng budgetary explosion from which the mushroom cloud is still not settled. But all that is in the context of a set of self-imposed economic sanctions called Brexit that is acting like a handbrake on the UK economy. I'll leave the final word to Jeremy Warner from his excellent article this week. Unable or unwilling to take advantage of Brexit freedoms, but denied unfettered access to European markets, the wider economy meanwhile splutters alarmingly from one shock to the next, seemingly holed below the waterline. Singapore-on-Thames, this is not.